Well, throughout NBA history, there have been a plethora of elite peaks that have been tragically cut short due to some untimely injury issues. From Pete Maravich to Penny Hardaway, Bill Walton, and Yao Ming, many names come to mind when trying to determine which player undone by injury presents us with the biggest could've, would've, should've. A name, though, that likely doesn't get enough respect in this category is the criminally underrated Tracy McGrady. In his absolute peak, this 6'8", 210-pound shooting guard was an absolute walking bucket and, at least from an offensive standpoint, was second to none. In a time when Kobe Bryant roamed the earth and scoring was at an absolute premium, McGrady was lighting it up on a nightly basis and having his peak squandered in Orlando while playing with a cast that was supposed to include Grant Hill. Speaking of players who had promising careers cut short due to injury. And for those 4 seasons McGrady and Hill were teamed up in Orlando, Grant ended up playing just a grand total of 47 games, and that was of a possible 328. As a result, Orlando was steamy ass, and McGrady's 4-year tenure from 2000 through 2004 resulted in not a single playoff series victory for the Magic. McGrady would leave Orlando after just those 4 seasons and have one more stellar year in 2004-2005 with the Houston Rockets. But in 2005-2006, at just the age of 26, McGrady would play in only 47 games due to continued back issues. And sadly enough, T-Mac would never be the same, making only one more All-Star appearance for the remainder of his NBA career before retiring from the league at just 32 years of age. But in looking at what McGrady was in his 4-year stint in Orlando, it really does beg the question of just what could have been. Those seasons realistically weren't even his prime, as he arrived in Orlando at just 21 years old and was gone by 24. In those 4 seasons, McGrady was All-NBA second team twice and All-NBA first team twice, while finishing 4th in league-wide MVP voting 2 years in a row at just 22 and 23 years old. And the second of those seasons, in 2002-2003, T-Mac had perhaps one of the best single-season offensive outputs in NBA history. In that year, McGrady led the NBA in scoring at 32.1 points per game. And oh, sure, that likely doesn't sound like much to you kids these days, as after all, the last 9 consecutive scoring leaders have now eclipsed the 30-point total, including Luka Doncic just this year at nearly 34 points per game. Of course, league-wide scoring this season was 114 per night on average. But way back when, in 2002-2003, when T-Mac was popping off for 32 a night, league-wide scoring was only a paltry 95.1 points a night. McGrady led the league that season at 32.1 per game, while Kobe Bryant was second that year at 30 points per game. No other NBA player that season averaged more than 27. Ray Allen was 10th that year in scoring at just 22.5 points per game. For some additional context, Cam Thomas was 26th in scoring this season at 22.5 points per game. Yeah, as I said, scoring was at an absolute premium. But T-Mac wasn't just an elite scorer, as he posted 6.5 rebounds and 5.5 assists to go along with his 32-point per game scoring average. And that was en route to McGrady leading the NBA that season in win shares per 48 minutes, player efficiency rating, box plus minus, and value over replacement. And for a little peek at the other players floating around the NBA at that time in their primes, the top 5 in value over replacement in order behind McGrady for that season was Kevin Garnett, Kobe Bryant, Tim Tim Duncan and Dirk Nowitzki. And again, McGrady was only in his aged 23 season. For his 4-year Orlando tenure, spanning 295 games of sample size, T-Mac averaged 28 points per game, 7 rebounds, and 5.2 assists in an NBA where league-wide scoring averages were only in the mid-90s. Unfortunately, McGrady just couldn't stay healthy beyond his mid-20s, and when he was in his absolute prime in those Orlando years, the roster was shackled with the constraints of the massive Grant Hill contract while he sat out virtually 4 straight seasons with injuries. As a result, tragically, McGrady made it beyond the first round just one time in his entire NBA career. And that came in his final NBA season with the San Antonio Spurs in 2012-2013. During a playoff run, he played just 6 games and scored not a single point. What we saw out of him, though, in his 4 healthy years in Orlando constitutes one of the most elite offensive perimeter players that has ever walked on a basketball court, making T-Mac arguably the greatest what-if in NBA history.